Welcome to our Monday Night Memories series, and today a very special edition as we're going to pay tribute to one of the great players in the history of Purdue basketball, Terry Dischinger. Terry passed away in the third week of October after an illness, and one of the greats, certainly, like I said, in the history of Purdue basketball. And not only from a personal and professional level, Terry was quite a figure on and off the court. You've got Tim McGinley, who played with Terry and in his college days, and of course Tim went on to do many things, but also a longtime member of the Purdue Board of Trustees. Dave Schellhase joins us also. Dave led the nation in scoring, was an All-American right after Purdue's next All-American after Terry Dischinger, and David did a number of things in basketball, including coaching at Purdue and other places as a head coach as well. Is also in the process of finishing a book coming out. We'll talk about that. And of course, Ralph Taylor. And Ralph, part of Purdue's not most recent, but Purdue's first Final Four team, 1969. One of the great all-time crowd favorites, longtime member of the Purdue radio crew. Also worked with Rob Blackman and company and Larry Clisby for years as a color analyst for Purdue men's basketball. Ralph and Tim, and our Indianapolis natives, so also grew up. Correct, Tim? That's right. You played
Yes.
right? And want to make sure I had my facts right. That would be the first time. Of course, Dave Schellhase, the pride of Evansville North High School, and made his way to West Lafayette as well. First, I guess I'll start with you, Tim, because you were a teammate of Dave and longtime of Terry, and a longtime relationship. Just talk about Terry Dischinger, the person. It's hard maybe to put that all into one thought process, but he was a very unique basketball player, but also professionally one of the most unique people you'd ever want to meet.
Well, both of those statements are true. I first met Terry at the Indiana-Kentucky High School All-Star Series, which is famous here in Indiana, and we were roommates on that team. And Terry was number 5. I was number 10, which was the last guy on the team, which perhaps meant I was the worst player on the team. But Terry was number 5, as I mentioned, and we had 5 centers on that team, and it didn't take long to realize that Terry was the best player on the team. And in fact, we went on to win both games, and he was named the most valuable player. And so I got an early glimpse at his future. They both came to Purdue. We were roommates, both studied chemical engineering. And perhaps a perspective on him and his career needs to include what basketball was like back then.
Yes.
You could not play as freshmen. So he only had 3 years to play. There were no three-point shots. There was no shot clock. So it was a very different environment. In fact, one of the things that strikes me about Terry's records, which you can go into maybe later, is the fact that he only played in 70 games at Purdue.
Right.
And you look at today's teams are playing over 30 games a season. They play all 4 years. So current players have 120 games to set records. Terry only had 7 in comparison, and yet he's still, I think, number 2 in rebounding, which is remarkable. I think number 6 in scoring, and we can go on to the statistics. But and you got to realize this was a young man who was 6'7", 190 pounds, playing center, which again is a little bit out of date. But just a little bit about his personal life. And Terry, extremely hardworking. Very religious. In fact, when we'd fly back from basketball games while the rest of us were sleeping or cutting up, Terry would be in the back of the plane reading the Bible. Mm-hmm. And he carried that religious devotion throughout his whole life. had a wonderful family, became a great orthodontist by going to school during the off seasons of his NBA career, and just a fine human being. And sidelight, Terry and I both dated girls who were best friends since the fifth grade, and I spoke at his funeral here a couple of months ago, but the highlight of the funeral was to see those two reconnect and all the joy that they felt, because Terry had been sick for quite some time. But a wonderful man, wonderful basketball player, and definitely deserves to be in the upper echelon of any kind of all-star, All-American, Hall of Fame that you want to talk about from Purdue. And the statistics bear that out. So let me stop there and let you go on.
Well, and that is the truth. I mean, his rebound numbers are unbelievable, and again, his ability to play inside outside at 6'7", very, very impressive. And Dave, you had Dave Schellhase, of course, the 1966 All-American and All Big Ten in a couple of years, also at Purdue. Had an interesting experience because your early days, and this also speaks to Terry's amazing academic life and athletic life, but the fact that he was finishing up his degree and coaching the freshman team. But tell us that story a little bit about how you first, you obviously came from Evansville, very highly regarded, big time scorer, et cetera. But and you became the next great scorer at Purdue, certainly. But talk about that relationship with Terry and what you just the first time you were around him.
Well, do I do something here?
No, you're good. Just speak.
Okay. Interestingly enough, I had when I was in grade school, 7th and 8th grade especially, I was really getting into basketball, and my dad was an official.
Yeah.
And from time to time, he would take me along and say, I want you to watch this guy do this and this guy do that. I can remember Roger Kaiser, who played at Dale, Indiana, and then, of course, Terry. So my dad said, now you watch that Dischinger. He said I can remember he talked about how quick a step he had to the basket, how quick his footwork and so forth. And so right away, at an early age, I was a fan. He was 4 years ahead of me. So when I was in high school is when Purdue, he played at Purdue. And of course, everybody was a fan of Terry Dischinger's and that team too, with Tim and Berkshire and McQuitty. That was an interesting team. And I think a champion team outside of Ohio State.
Yeah. Very tough time to be in the Big Ten. Yeah.
And so they made sure, Bob King and Ray Eddy made sure that I got a chance to meet Terry Dischinger on my recruiting trip because I was always talking about him. Am I going to get a chance to meet Terry Dischinger? Da, 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 da.
Yeah.
So then when I finally got to Purdue as a freshman, Terry had one semester to go to get his degree. And he talked the NBA into allowing him to go to school during the week and play on the weekends. And to fill his time, I guess, he helped Bob King coach the freshman team. Now, in those days, the freshmen could only play each other. You played prelim games to the varsity games. But for us guys on the freshman team, that was unbelievable that we got a chance to scrimmage against Terry Dischinger, and he'd come back on Monday and we'd say, how many points you get? He'd say, I got 24 in San Francisco or whatever. So I got to know him as sort of a mentor, sort of a coach. So that was my main interaction with Terry in those years.
You know, Ralph, you had a chance, obviously, as a high schooler. You see, we're talking about offline about growing up in Indianapolis and hoping you could get good enough reception to see Purdue play. And I'm sure you watched those guys from down south also from time to time. But Terry Dischinger was a pretty unique guy in terms of his skill set as a player. I mean, yeah, we talked about his great rebounding skills, but your memories of even watching him in the NBA in terms of what made him such a, you know, and it's been well documented. Oscar Robertson's talked about him. Others have talked about just how good this guy was as a player. But your recollections of what you saw watching him as a grade schooler, but also during his time when you were at Purdue and he was in the NBA and later than that.
I know in grade school watching him, it was amazing seeing him going up against bigger individuals like Walt Bellamy, Jerry Lucas, some of the other Big Ten centers. But Terry was just a very cerebral player, had outstanding footwork, was very fundamentally sound. And I must confess, the reason I started watching Purdue basketball on Channel 4 is the fact that Willie Merriweather, who's a teammate of the great Oscar Robertson and Chris Pisatics, came to Purdue as a freshman in 55, 56, and that caused me to start watching Purdue games. And then I remember the great Tim McGinley as a young kid watching him play and reading about him at the scene of high school, and then going to Purdue. That just added to my starting to watch Purdue basketball. But, you know, Terry was really outstanding. I think, unfortunately, a lot of times guys like him they get forgotten because people were not born when he played, or they just go with the latest outstanding player. But Terry, I noticed, was ranked number 3 in the Yard Barker top 25 Purdue basketball players of all time. And I think another outstanding attribute with Terry was he made the 1960 Olympics team. Yeah. Now, on that team were individuals like Walt Bellamy, Bob Boozer, who was outstanding, Jerry Lucas, Oscar Robertson, Jerry West. So to make the Olympic team speaks volumes about Terry's ability as a player. And then, of course, when he was at Purdue, he was just really outstanding, played defense and offense. Not only could he score, but he could also rebound at 190 pounds. He was one of the best rebounders in the Big Ten.
Yeah, I think he's still, if he rebounds per minute played, he's about as high as it gets. Think about this now. This was the first.
Hey, Alan, could I add
go ahead, Tim. Go ahead.
The Olympic team that Ralph just mentioned, because I think it is remarkable. You got to realize he couldn't play as freshman, so he'd only had 1 year of college ball, and he was 19 years old, and somehow got tapped for at least trying out for the Olympic team. But when you think about how little experience or exposure that he had, that he could not only make the team, he ended up, I think, the 4th leading scorer on.
He started, right?
Yeah. He started, and they it was in Rome, and they went undefeated and won the gold medal. And I don't think any team came within 20 points of them. So just a remarkable accomplishment with very little exposure. And I think to add to Ralph's comments about Terry's visibility and renown within basketball, I think that probably it was diminished some by Ohio State and Jerry Lucas, as you said. Right. Ohio State was number 1 in the country all 3 of our years that we played. We got as high as 6 in the country. Nobody knows that, of course, and doesn't care. And Jerry Lucas was named Player of the Year, similar to Zach Edey. So as good as Terry was, you had, as good as our team was, you were kind of overshadowed by the Ohio State and Jerry Lucas presence, and that perhaps is why he hasn't had as much publicity or notoriety as some other players. But the facts are the facts, and the statistics are the statistics, and he belongs among the great.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, John Havlicek, Bailey Howell, was it Mel Norwell?
Mel Knoll, Jerry.
Knoll, I'm sorry, yeah, guys, all that. That was as dominant as Purdue is right now in the Big Ten almost. And of course, Ohio State played in 3 national championship games, only won 1 of them. But and a guy named Bob Knight played in those teams too. But it is pretty amazing that Terry, and the fact that he's, like you said, got his way to his starting role. And I can remember reading a book written or a biography of Oscar Robertson talking about how, like I said, what a great player he was and how much he meant to that group. And even Purdue's own Carson Cunningham wrote a great book on each of the Olympic trials from each year, from each Olympiad, and well documented Dischinger and what he was just to make that team. And that was maybe the first team that was not an AAU team. Is that correct? I may be wrong on that, but it was one of the first teams that they actually got guys from all over the place to play on the team from colleges. And very, very impressive from that standpoint. Dave, I want to ask you, what made him? Was it quickness? Was he a dead-eye shooter? I mean, obviously he could shoot the basketball. I know there weren't, as Tim well documented, no three-pointer at that time, but was he a quick jumper? What made him so unique as a basketball player?
Well, I think all those things. I mean, he was an all-state football player and a
track too, right?
track hurdler.
Yeah.
He was quick. He was, a good jumper, but he had a beautiful jump shot. And, when he went to the pros, he had to go in the Army a couple years and he just had a tremendous background. Very competitive, but I think his quickness for his size, I mean, he was just a handful to guard. I mean, you talk about rebounding against big guys. Well, they had to guard him too. I mean, he was quick and he could get to the basket and he could get to the foul line, and he scored a lot of points.
Yeah, and did it in a number of different ways, as pretty well documented about doing that in terms of and Ralph, even with the way basketball's evolved certainly, and it might have even been different in your days in Lambert Fieldhouse and Mackey Arena, even as it continued to evolve. But you were around, played with the greatest scorers, even though Dave Schellhase is number 2 and Terry Dischinger is number 3, but Rick Mount, you played with guys that was a scoring game at that time. But Terry Dischinger had a unique way also, from everything I've read, of also making others better around him. He was a great team player, even in the NBA, when it obviously is a scorers league. Any thoughts on that from that perspective?
Well, I think Terry is more than just a scorer. I think he was good in assisting, and I think he had no problems passing to the open man.
Yeah,
and I think that really separates good players from just great players. And I think he was a great player because he had the ability not only to assist, he could defend, he could rebound, and he was an excellent shooter, and he played defense. And that spoke volumes about his ability to play. And again, let's keep in mind, he's 6'7", 190, going up against Jerry Lucas, Walt Bellamy, some of the other Big Ten centers who had trouble guarding him. Like Dave pointed out, he may have had some trouble guarding them, but they had even more trouble trying to guard him because he was inside out, very nimble and very quick.
Tim, one of my favorite stories, whether it's urban legend or not, maybe you can help me with this, that heading into his last college game, Michigan State, or maybe it was the last weekend, that his teammates, Olympic teammates, Jerry Lucas, and maybe it was John Havlicek. I don't know if Havlicek was on that team, but
yeah.
Lucas had said, by the way, we're going to play Jimmy Rail and we're going to slow him down, and we're going to lead the path so that you can win the Big Ten scoring championship, of which he scored 52. He holds the record still for the most 40 plus point games in Purdue history, even more than Rick Mount, which is interesting. But is that story the least bit true? Is it a good story? But I know that Lucas and company had a tremendous amount of respect for Terry Dischinger. But have you ever heard that one before?
Yeah, I witnessed it.
Okay, tell us about it.
Terry and Jimmy Rail were, I think, tied in scoring, and
of course, Rail played at Indiana. Right, go ahead.
Rail played at Indiana and tied around, I don't have this exactly, but around 30 points a game average. And Terry and Lucas had become close friends on the Olympic team. And as you set it up, the Purdue is going to play Michigan, and IU's playing Ohio State. Ohio State's already clinched the title for Big Ten, so this wasn't even a question. And it was actually via the old telegram, if you remember the telegram. Terry got a telegram from Jerry Lucas, and it basically said, and I don't remember the quote, but I saw it, that you do your job today, and we'll take care of Jimmy Rail. And they put Havlicek on Rail. Havlicek was known as a pretty aggressive defender, and of course they were such a great team. And yeah. I think he may have scored 15 points or something like that. And Terry had, and we did, we all were aware of the situation, so we made sure that Terry got the ball a lot, and he won going away the individual scoring championship. I might add, if I can, another story.
Please do.
Taken off of Ralph's comments about Walt Bellamy. One of our most memorable games in our career at Purdue for Terry and I both was our sophomore year, and the opening Big Ten game for us was at Bloomington. And IU was favored to win the Big Ten. Nobody knew how good Ohio State was because they hadn't played a game yet. And Walt Bellamy was an All-American center, and they had Frank Radovich and Gary Long. Anyway, a really outstanding team. So they were heavily favored. And in our case, in my personal case, that was the first game I ever started for Purdue. And I only did because our Bobby Orrell, the guard who was ahead of me, got hurt in the prior game. So we go down there, we're all sophomores, and we don't have a chance. And of course we upset them and won that game. And I think if you would have asked Terry of all the games we played, he would have probably pointed to that one as the highlight, and it certainly was for me as well. So anyway, when you mentioned Walt Bellamy, he was a great player as well. I could tell you a lot of stories. So I'll pause there.
Well, I'm going to say there are so many guys, and you talk about the heyday of Big Ten basketball, and there have been many, but that was a time too. But there were just some unbelievable.
I have a question I'd like to ask Tim, and I've always been curious about that. Did Terry ever think about going somewhere else? I mean, what was his recruiting like?
Well, he played at Terre Haute,
right,
and his coach was a man named Kurt. Kurt's oldest son, a year or 2 years older, was already at Purdue playing basketball and was on the team. His brother, Bobby Kurt, was in Terry's class in Terre Haute, and he came to Purdue on a scholarship as well. But later, so anyway, Terry was just kind of geared to come to Purdue because of those relationships. And the only other thing I could add is, and he had already committed to come to Purdue when we were playing in the Indiana All-Star games. That's why we were roommates.
Yeah.
But Terry told me about his recruiting trip to Indiana, which didn't go well, and I won't reveal all the details of it. But in any case, his dad said to him, "You're going to Purdue," not IU, and it had to do with some circumstances around the recruiting process. So
there were quote unquote a lot of circumstances I heard in those days around Indiana and recruiting, but right, I can't prove any of it, but everybody I think I've ever talked to has talked about that went on both places from a visit standpoint. One thing that Terry told me, and I was fortunate enough to do a pretty extensive interview with him in 2015. But talked about his mother being a huge role in just kind of making him the, I don't know if it was a competitiveness standpoint, but that she was big in terms of making him who he was. But boy, he loved. I know he talked also about how much he loved to play football, but he was certainly a. And then his track. You know, if you think about that, that being long like he was at 6'7", 190, I suppose that the hurdling set up well. But I would think he also, I think, played a fair amount of baseball too.
Yeah. Quick side note: he played baseball for Purdue.
Yeah,
1 year.
that's what I thought.
And at first base, and you can imagine a target to throw at that's 6'7", pretty attractive situation. But
yeah,
basketball was his first love.
Yeah, no question.
Hey, Alan, can I interject for a second?
Yeah, by all means.
You know, I think when Purdue fans look at who the greatest Purdue players in history were, I think if you take this statistic and compare it to any other Purdue basketball player, I think it should resolve the issue who was the best Purdue basketball player, college and professionally. This guy was 3 times an NBA All-Star, and he was the NBA Rookie of the Year.
Yeah,
that was Terry Dischinger.
Yeah.
What other Purdue basketball player has achieved any of those? And I think also when you look at the fact that when he was drafted in '62, he won the NBA Rookie of the Year award over Jerry Lucas, Dave DeBusschere, John Havlicek, Chet Walker. So any fans curious who they were, they might check them out and see that some of these guys are inducted to the NBA Hall of Fame.
Yeah.
But Dischinger, again, 3-time NBA All-Star, 63 Rookie of the Year.
You know, one other player of that era was Don Nelson.
Oh, yeah.
Don Nelson was the center at Iowa, and he too was All-American level, and then, of course, became a pro coach, and he would have been in that same rookie class, Ralph, that you're talking about. Big Ten you had Terry, you had Jerry Lucas, you had Don Nelson, you had Havlicek. It was a loaded conference in terms of talent.
Yeah, no question. Almost to the point of being unprecedented. His personality, Dave, and again, just knowing him over the years, I always said he was just such a lovely man. Even though obviously I'm amazed that he was like Tim McGinley, a chemical engineer, and going to Purdue. Nothing against the degrees that Ralph and Dave and myself all received. That was all wonderful, but it is very, very impressive to be able to do that and go on and become a pretty well-renowned orthodontist as well. But just talk about it, what kind of guy he was in terms of he always seemed to be kind of, to me, to be somewhat soft-spoken, not a lot about himself, and maybe Tim might be the best answers, but I'll start with you, Dave. What are your recollections just in terms of what kind of...
Well, again, I agree with you as far as, academically to engineering. I mean, I wouldn't even went to the building, and that's amazing. And then he decided to become an orthodontist in the kind of the middle of his pro career, and he went there in between seasons. As far as I only played 2 years in the NBA, and the first year he was in the Army.
Yeah.
But then the next year, I remember he was with Detroit.
Yeah.
And in those days, there were only 10 teams. So you played everybody 9 times. So, he always made a point, even though I wasn't playing a lot, to talk to me and say hello and, encourage me. And so you're right. He was the kind of person, I think, that cared about other people and wanted them to do well.
Yeah, no question. Tim, you may, just because you were rooming with him and was around him, just his personality in terms of very obviously intellectual, but also just kind of, I was kind of a little bit on the soft-spoken side, but I don't know if that's fair. That may be how he interviewed. I don't know, but what in all the years of having that relationship with him, what did you count on most in terms of that relationship and what kind of person he was?
Well, I think he was pretty steady and consistent, and basketball player I knew, and when he was 20 years old, and his traits and characteristics were pretty much the same when he was 70 and 80 years old.
Yeah.
Very much family oriented, loved, as we all do, our kids and grandkids, but he devoted time and time again to whatever their particular needs were. And I guess I'd also point to the orthodontic career.
Yeah.
Because, he played basketball for a few years, 4 at Purdue and I think 9 total in the pros. But then he had 30+ year career as an orthodontist. And I had a chance to meet some of his patients when I was in Portland, and other people who, and it was sort of summarized around the idea that he was a very caring individual, and that he would go out of his way to console parents and console patients. And as Terry said one time after he'd retired, he said he had the greatest career because he got to do what he loved. And the other part of it was that his son followed him in the practice and continues today as running the Dischinger practice. So, and he, rose to fame in that field too, because he was a visiting lecturer. He had several patents that he created, and actually toured around the world talking about these patents. A company that made them sponsored him and sent he and Mary around the world. So he loved the history of the basketball, and he had the gold medal in his office, along with his jersey, which was special for his patients. But just a wonderful human being, and a role model in many ways, basketball being one, but certainly not limited to just basketball.
Yeah, one thing I do know that my few times with Terry was, if he were alive today, he would be talking about this basketball team. I want to get to with each one of you not real quickly, but about that. Of course, Purdue returns to #1 rank today. I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing. I think it's a good thing. But he loved it, and in my experience, loved it even when, again, one of my last experiences with him, talking about Matt Painter and the job he was doing. But to be #1 each of the last 3 years has been pretty impressive. But talk about that, Ralph, and then, what you're seeing. We again got to talk a little bit after that win over Arizona, but this is a very special unit. It could use a guy like Terry Dischinger, but Matt Painter has some players that number 15 in the middle is pretty good, and so is number 3 and as well. But tell me about where you're seeing this team right now, and I know that if Terry were here, we'd be having this conversation as well.
Well, I think when you start with number 15, Schellhase, you're probably looking at a 10-point advantage already, and you're also looking at the fact that whoever's guarding him probably will foul out.
Yeah.
And I think the impact he's making on the court is just tremendous. And when you throw in when Smith and Lawyer are on, it's like, who are you going to sacrifice in terms of playing defense against Purdue? You're going to double, triple team Edey, leaving Smith and Lawyer wide open. I think this team has the ability to go quite a distance as long as they continue playing together. Lawyer and Smith continue to hit their shots when they get them. And then the addition of Lance Jones has really helped, because I think it's hard to pressure us when you got Lance Jones, who's another ball handler. And I think right now we're on a roll, and just hope we can keep our momentum going.
Tim McGinley, you can talk about good guard play. You did it in your day. Number 2 and number 3 were unbelievably good. Obviously, late Saturday afternoon in a game that you witnessed. But what are you seeing from this team? I mean, it's hard not to like them. It's hard not to like the way they're coached. They seem like they're great guys. But what makes this team extra special from your perspective?
Well, having been a guard when I was at Purdue, I kind of leaned towards watching the guards and how they play. And I actually had an opportunity after the game to be with Smith, and the thing that struck me about it, I'm taller than he is.
Yeah.
I don't know how he does what he does.
I don't know if your arms are as long though. Boy, he has long
Well,
arms.
that may be, and the jumping ability is clearly in his favor. But, you know, it's just a special team. I mean, you don't have this kind of performance over several years very often. They're fun to watch. They're exciting. I mean, my wife, who's a basketball fan, she can't wait to go to every single game. I can't invite anybody else. They're special, and they're better than last year. My thought, though, and my focus is let's win the Big Ten championship. Let's focus on that and get that done, and then go from there. Because you know, it's a long season. There's a lot of ups and downs, and who knows what lies ahead. But they are special, and it's fun to watch. And you just can't say enough about Zach Edey. I mean, I heard Robbie Hummel say people think he's only good because he's big, and you know that's just so far from the truth in terms of how he's worked and improved on his footwork, on you know his shots, on you know dealing with double teams, triple teams, you know assists that he, you know he didn't exactly stand out Saturday against Arizona. But at the end of the day, he had like, I think, 23 points and 9 rebounds, something like that. So
very average day for him, yeah.
Yeah, ho-hum performance, right? Anyway, they're special, and you know, it's going to be a wonderful year, regardless of how it turns out.
Yeah, Dave, you and I run each other in the hallways of Mackey Arena, and you've coached at the college level, and certainly have watched the game for years. But you talk about this team. I like the one thing you have to like also is just all the other role players that can make things happen. Even guys, you know, teams you've coached. It's tough to have a Mason Gillis, Ethan Morton, Caleb First, Miles Colvin, Camden Heide that may not play that many minutes and certain particular games. And some days they will. Trey Kaufman-Wren falls into that as well. Talk about that from a coaching standpoint, how difficult that can be to manage that. And yet you've got a team that seems to be very, very together.
Well, I agree with what Tim and Ralph have both said. I've never seen one player ever improve like Edey.
Yeah.
And that's in all areas. I mean, rebounding, blocking shots. The other thing that I've really been impressed in the last couple of years, especially last year and this year, there's never a loose ball that they don't go for. Yeah. I mean, there's nobody standing around. And I think a lot of that has to do with playing time. If you're going to go out there and loaf, you aren't going to play.
Yeah.
Now, of course, Edey's going to play, and our 2 guards are going to play. But the point is they're really getting the effort. You know, they're not going to lose very many games. I mean, they're just not. They're deep and they're good, and so it's a good time to be a Purdue fan right now.
All right. Well, in the memory of Terry Dischinger, it would be fun for all of us to be watching them in April and in Arizona. And like you said, Tim, the 26th Big Ten championship is important too. And you guys always, as players, Ralph had the opportunity to be a member of a Big Ten champion team. It's a big deal to win the Big Ten. And I think Matt Painter believes that as well. They want to take care of first things first. But gentlemen, thank you so much for your time today. And it's a bittersweet time, but I think Terry Dischinger will never be forgotten in Purdue basketball annals. And we want to do what we can to make sure that happens. And you guys did a great job of helping bring that light. Happy holidays to you and to all of everyone along the line that are watching and listening this as well. Thanks so much. And thanks also to our dear friend Nate Barrett and the folks at Chariot Auto Group who sponsor Monday Night Memories. It's always a privilege to do that. We're going to do one next month, guys, which you guys will enjoy watching, is a 1974 NIT team. And I'm getting all those guys. I don't know if we got enough microphones for all of them, but we'll have a lot of fun with that group. I'm sure we'll be doing that. I think we're targeting January the 8th. For that, and of course, they're going to be up as part of the, hard to believe you guys can know this, hard to believe it's 50 years since they won the NIT in 1974, but they'll be back for the Purdue-Penn State game on January 13th, so we'll have some fun with that. So happy holidays, all safe travels if you're traveling. we appreciate all of you that are interested in goldenblack.com and golden and our YouTube site on down the line. We appreciate you as well. So thanks again for watching and listening, and we'll look forward to our next edition of Monday Night Memories in January.